An unnamed man enjoys a stable life with a good job and a supportive relationship, choosing to care for his girlfriend who stays home. Her pursuit of a remote job leads to a week apart, where her enthusiasm turns to distance. He discovers the company's toxic CEO uses interviews for unethical tests, and her agreement shatters his trust. Shocked by her excuse, "I just wanted to work," he ends it, moves out, and cuts ties. Over time, he rebuilds his life, meets someone new cautiously, and discards an old photo, choosing self-respect over revenge. Life's been good lately, the kind of steady I always hoped for. I wake up each morning to the hum of the coffee maker, the apartment filled with the rich smell, and think, this is it. I've got a solid job, 9 to 5, decent pay, a corner office with a view of the city skyline. A co-worker stops by my desk, grinning. "Big meeting today?" And I nod, "Yeah, prepping hard." The work's predictable, but I like it that way, the stability of comfort after years of scrambling. My relationship's the rock I lean on. She's there when I get home, usually curled up with a book or sketching on the couch, and I say, "Good day." She smiles, quiet, perfect, her voice soft. We've been together a while now, and it's strong. No fights, just easy nights. I cook dinner, the kitchen war with the sizzle of chicken, and she sets the table, asking new recipe? I laugh, trying to impress you. The routine's ours, and it feels right. A friend calls, "Still happy?" And I reply, "More than ever, the true steady." I insist that she not work. When we move in together, I said, "Let me take care of you." And she hesitated. "Are you sure?" I nodded. "Yeah, I want to." She quit her part-time gig, and I covered the bills, rent, groceries, even her art supplies. "You're spoiling me," she teases, and I grin. That's the plan. A neighbor knocks, dropping off mail. "Nice setup you got." And I say, "Thanks, works for us." The financial independence lets me provide, and I feel good about it. Her smile, my reward. Confidence grows from that. At work, I lead meetings, my voice clear, and a colleague says, "You've got this," boosting me. I think, I'm doing it right. The job foundation. At home, I fix a leaky faucet. The tool's clanking, and she watches. "Handy too?" I chuckle, learning for you. The stability makes me feel needed. Her reliance a quiet strength. A friend visits, looking sharp, and I reply, feeling it, the confidence rooted deep. Our days have a rhythm. Mornings I make coffee, the pot gurgling, and she joins me. "Best part waking up," she jokes. I head to work, the commute smooth, and think, life's on track. Evenings we watch TV, the screen flickering, and she leans on me, asking, "Another episode?" I nod, "Why not?" The stability's a blanket, and I mutter, "This is home." The feeling's solid. A co-worker texts, "Big weekend?" And I say, "Just chilling." The piece of luxury. She thrives in it. One afternoon, she shows me a sketch, the lines vivid, and says, "Been working on this." I admire her talented, and she blushes, "Thanks to you." I buy her new paints, the store clerk asking, "Gift?" And I nod, "For my artist." At home, she paints, the brush strokes soft, and I watch, thinking, she's happy. A friend calls, she's lucky, and I laugh. I am too. The care bond. I feel needed daily. She asks, "Can you fix the lamp?" And I grab tools, the bulb clicking on, saying, "There we go." She hugs me, my hero, and I smile anytime. At work, I close a deal, the boss clapping, "Great job." And I think, I've got this. The dual roles, provider, partner, fill me with purpose. A neighbor waves, happy couple, and I reply, "Working on it." The confidence of quiet pride. The stability shapes us. Weekends we cook together. The kitchen a mess of flour, and she laughs. "Disaster chef." I join in team effort, and we clean up, the sink splashing. I pay the bills, the checkbook balance, and mutter, "All good." She sketches me, the pencil scratching, and says, "My muse," making me grin. A friend stops by. "Nice life," and I nod. Built it myself, the feeling's strong. Challenges fade. One evening, a work stress call comes, the phone buzzing, and I handle it. Got it covered. Reassuring the client. She brings tea, rough day, and I sip, better now. The stability holds, and I think, we're solid. A neighbor asks, "Any plans?" And I say, "Just this, content." The apartment glows, and I mutter, "Home's where I'm needed." The confidence a shield. The next day, I wake early, the coffee ready, and watch her sleep, thinking, this is mine to protect. At work, I lead a meeting, the room quiet, and a colleague says, "You're the man." boosting me. Home. She hugs me. Thanks for everything. And I reply, always, the stability of foundation. A friend texts, still good? And I say, better every day, the need and confidence intertwined. The morning sun filtered through the curtains, and I found her at the kitchen table, her sketchbook closed, a rare frown on her face. Everything okay? I asked, pouring coffee, the pot gurgling. She sighed, I'm tired of staying home all the time. I sat across from her, surprised, and said, You've got your art, though. She shook her head. It's not enough. I want to be needed to do something for myself. The words hung there, and I felt a flicker of unease, muttering, Didn't see that coming. A neighbor knocked, delivering a package. Morning delivery, and I nodded, Thanks. My mind elsewhere. She opened up more. Later, we sat on the couch, the TV off, and she said, I've been thinking about work again. I raised an eyebrow, thought we agreed I'd handle that, and she leaned forward. I know, but I found a job, my field, graphic design. I listened, the idea new, and asked, Where's it at? She pulled out her phone, showing me the listing. A firm in another city, but there's an interview. I frowned, that's a trip, and she nodded. I know, but it's a chance. A friend called. Plans today? And I said, Just talking. The conversation shifted my comfort. Her enthusiasm grew. That evening, she paced the living room, the floor creaking, and said, I could design logos, make something real. I watched, stirring dinner, and replied, Sounds big. Proud of you. She smiled, really? And I nodded, Yeah, if it makes you happy. The kitchen filled with the smell of sauce, and she added, The interview's next week. They need me there. I paused, the spoon in hand, thinking a week away. A co-worker texted, Busy night? And I answered, Cooking with a twist. The news settling. I hesitated. The next day at work, I led a meeting, my voice steady, but my mind drifted to her trip. A colleague said, Great pitch. I replied, Thanks, but wondered, Is this safe? Back home, she showed me the itinerary, the papers rustling, and I asked, You sure about this? She sat beside me. It's just an interview. I'll be back. I nodded slowly. Okay, but call me. The stability I'd built wobbling. A neighbor waved from the window. Nice day. And I forced a smile. Yeah. The doubt creeping. Her happiness swayed me. One afternoon, she sketched excitedly, the pencil flying, and said, Imagine me working, contributing. I leaned over. You already do. And she laughed. Not like this. The drawing was vibrant, and I thought, She's lit up. At dinner, she planned aloud, I'll pack light, see the city, and I said, Sounds fun. Keep me posted. A friend stopped by. Trip plans? And I explained. Her interview. The enthusiasm infectious. I muttered. For her smile, the hesitation fading. We talked logistics. That night, we sat with tea, the cups clinking, and she said, Flight's booked for Monday. I asked, How long? And she replied, 5 days back Friday. I nodded, safe travels, but added, Check-in daily. She squeezed my hand. I will. And I felt her excitement, saying, Glad you're chasing this. A co-worker called late night, and I said, Planning with her, the support growing. The kitchen clock ticked, and I thought, Her happiness matters. The decision solidified. The next morning, I made breakfast, the egg sizzling, and she joined me, nervous but ready. I smiled, You'll nail it, and she hugged me. Thanks for believing. At work, I closed the deal, the boss clapping. Solid work. And I thought, I can handle her trip. Home, she packed, the suitcase zipping, and I said, Proud of you, go shine. A neighbor asked, She off soon? And I nodded, Yeah, big step. The agreement firm. Her energy lifted us. One evening, we walked, the air cool, and she said, This could change everything. I held her hand. Then go for it. And she beamed. With your support. The park was quiet, kids playing, and I thought, Her joy is worth it. A friend texted, Excited for her? And I replied, Yeah, big time. The hesitation gone. Back home, she danced the music, the room alive, and I laughed. That's my girl. The decision a gift. The night before, we sat on the balcony. The stars faint, and she said, Thanks for letting me do this. I replied, For your happiness. And she leaned on me, You're the best. I thought, Stability can bend, and added, Call when you land. A co-worker's message. Good luck to her. And I said, Appreciate it. The support wide. The suitcase waited, and I muttered, Her dream, the chapter turning. The day she left for her interview, the apartment felt quieter than usual. I waved her off the door, her suitcase rolling, and said, "Call when you land." She smiled, "Will do," and the cab pulled away, the engine fading. I stood there, the morning cool, muttering, 5 days manageable. At work, a colleague asked, "She off?" And I nodded, "Yeah, job thing. The separation starting." The coffee tasted flat without her, and I thought, "Miss her already." The silence knew. Her first call came that evening. I answered, the phone warm, and she said, "Landed safe. City's huge." I grinned, "Show me." And she panned the camera, tall buildings, busy streets. "Nice." I replied, leaning back on the couch, the cushion sinking. She talked about the flight, the hotel, and added, "Interviews tomorrow, nervous." I said, "You'll kill it." And she laughed, "Hope so." A friend texted, "How's she doing?" And I answered, "Good so far." The connection steady. The second day brought more. She called during lunch, the background noisy, and said, "Look at this park." The screen showed green trees, people jogging, and I said, "Pretty relaxing?" She nodded, "Yeah, needed it." We chatted about the city's food, her sketching plans, and she mentioned, "Interview went well. Second round Friday." I smiled, "Proud of you." And she beamed, "Thanks, miss you." I replied, "Miss you too." The distance bearable, her happiness a lift. A co-worker stopped by, "Busy call?" And I said, "Just her, the routine adjusting." I started to miss her more. That night, I cooked alone, the kitchen quiet, and thought, her last missing. The chicken sizzled, and I muttered, "Should have gone with her." A neighbor knocked, delivered mail, "Quiet house?" And I chuckled, "Yeah, too much." I watched TV, the screen flickering, and said, "Glad she's thriving." The pride outweighing the loneliness. A friend called, "Holding up?" And I said, "Yeah, she's doing great." The call's a lifeline. The shift began. Day 3. Her call was shorter. "Hey, just checking in," she said, her voice flat, and I asked, "How's it going?" She replied, "Fine, tired. City's exhausting." I frowned. "Everything okay?" And she said, "Yeah, just need rest." Avoiding camera. I nodded. "Get some sleep?" But felt a twinge, muttering, "Something's off." A co-worker texted, "Long day?" And I answered, "Yeah, missing her." The unease growing. Her distance grew. The next day, no video call, just a text. "Busy day, talk later." I stared at the phone, thinking, that's new, and replied, "Okay, call when you can." At work, I led a meeting, the room focused, but my mind wandered. "What's up?" A colleague said, "Good job." And I forced a smile, "Thanks." The worry creeping. Home, I paced, the floor creaking, and said, "She's pulling back." The silence louder. Sadness showed. Day 5. She called briefly, her voice low. "Interview's done. Got the job." I said, "That's amazing. Congrats." But she mumbled, "Yeah, thanks. No excitement." I asked, "You okay?" And she sighed, "Just tired. Talk tomorrow." I frowned, "Miss your face?" And she said, "Soon." Hanging up, I sat on the couch, muttering. She's not herself, the sadness in her tone of shadow. A friend stopped by. "She back soon?" And I nodded. Friday. The concern deepening. I reflected alone. That night I cooked, the pan hissing, and thought, something happened. The kitchen felt empty, and I said, maybe the city got to her. A neighbor waved from the window, "All good?" And I replied, "Yeah, just waiting." The unease await. I watched her old sketches, the lines vivid, and muttered, "Hope she's okay." The pride mixed with worry. A co-worker called, "Quiet night?" And I said, "Too quiet." The distance a test. The week stretched. The next day I worked late, the office dim, and thought, one more day. A colleague asked, "Missing her?" And I said, "More than I thought." The longing clear. Home, I cleaned, the vacuum humming, and said, "She'll explain Friday." The phone stayed silent, and I muttered, "Her sadness bothers me." The call's a fading thread. A friend texted, "Hang in there." And I replied, trying, the week apart challenge to our stability. The day she came back, the apartment buzzed with strange quiet. I heard the key turn, the door creaking open, and there she was, suitcase in hand, her smile faint. "You're home," I said, stepping forward, the relief mixing with concern. She dropped her bag. "Yeah, finally," and hugged me, but felt stiff. I pulled back, asking, "How is it?" She sighed, "Long trip," and I nodded, Missed you, let's talk. The kitchen table waited, and I thought, something's off. The reunion tense. A neighbor knocked. Welcome back. And I called, thanks. My focus on her. I pressed for answers. We sat with coffee, the mugs clinking, and I said, what happened out there? She stirred her drink, avoided my eyes, and replied, I'm just tired. That's all. I frowned. Tired from a week? You seem off on the phone. She shrugged. Travel wears me out. And I leaned in. Come on, more than that. The steam rose, and I muttered, not buying it. The worry growing. A friend texted she back, and I answered, yeah, but quiet, the unease deepening. She shared the news. After a pause, she said, got the job, though. I perked up. That's great, congrats. And she nodded, thanks, it's remote now. I smiled, perfect, no more trips. And she forced a grin, yeah, home office. The kitchen felt warmer, and I said, proud of you, but her eyes stayed downcast. A coworker called, big news, and I replied, she landed a job, the gladness real but shadowed. I thought, remote's good, but the sadness in her lingered. I tried to lift her. That evening, I cooked her favorite, pasta, the sauce simmering, and said, celebration dinner. She said, you didn't have to, and I laughed, for you I do. We ate, the forks clinking, and I asked, tell me about the interview. She said, went smooth, met the team, but her voice was flat. I added, new chapter, and she nodded, sure, the enthusiasm missing. A neighbor waved from the window. Smells good, and I smiled, thanks. The effort feeling one-sided. The worry persisted. Later, we watched TV, the screen glowing, and I said, you sure you're okay? She leaned back, just tired, I swear, and I replied, you've been off since day 3. She turned away, it's nothing, and I muttered, not convinced, the concern or not. The show droned, and I thought, something's hidden, the gladness for her job clashing with unease. A friend stopped by, is she good? And I said, says yes, but the doubt clear. I probed gently. The next morning, I made breakfast, the eggs sizzling, and said, long week deserves a treat. She joined me. You're sweet, but ate slowly. I asked, anything bug you out there? And she sighed, just the travel, really. I nodded, okay, but call if it hits again. And she said, will do. The promise week. A co-worker texted, celebrating, and I replied, trying to, the worry is shadow. I thought, job's a win, but the knot tightening. Her mood stayed low. That afternoon, she unpacked, the suitcase rustling, and I asked, find anything good? She said, just clothes, her tone dull. I helped, folding a shirt, and said, glad you're remote. Here with me. She smiled faintly, me too, but her eyes avoided mine. I muttered, not the homecoming I expected. The gladness strained. A neighbor knocked, settled in, and I said, getting there. The effort ongoing. I reflected alone. That night, I sat on the balcony, the air cool, and thought, she's hiding something. The city lights blinked, and I said, job's great, but that's sadness. The worry a hum. I remembered her calls, vibrant, then distant, and muttered, what changed? A friend called, how's she? And I replied, home, but off, the concern growing. The remote job news felt hollow, and I added, need to watch this, the stability wavering. The day closed with tension. I checked on her, the bedroom dim, and said, sleep, well, you earned it. She nodded, thanks, and turned over. I stood there, thinking, glad for the job, but the unease a constant. A co-worker's message, big week, and I said, yeah, mixed feelings, the truth slipping. I returned to the living room, the couch familiar, and muttered, something's not right. The gladness for her success undercut by a growing dread. The unease from her return lingered, a quiet hum beneath our days. I went to work, the office buzzing with morning chatter, and sat at my desk, the computer humming. A co-worker, Tom, dropped by with coffee, saying, rough week? I nodded. Yeah, she's back but off. He sipped, what's up? And I mentioned she got a job, remote, with some firm called Nexus Designs. His face tightened and he set the cup down. Nexus? You sure? I frowned. Yeah, why? And he leaned in, the air shifting. He spilled the truth. That place is a rep, Tom said, his voice low, and I asked, what kind? He glanced around. They're so toxic guy. uses his position in those interviews? I leaned forward, go on, and he muttered, cover for something else. I stared like, what? And he hesitated. Rumors say he tests loyalty, unofficially with women. The words hit, and I said, you're kidding. But his nod was serious. A colleague passed, meeting soon, and I said, yeah, my mind racing. Doubt crept in. Back at my desk, I typed Nexus Designs into the search bar, the screen glowing but found little polished site, vague bios. Too clean. I muttered, the worry growing. Tom returned. Heard anything from her? And I shook my head. Not much, just tired. He said, watch that place. And I replied, will do. The suspicion taking root. The office phone rang, a client call, and I handled it. Got it covered. But my thoughts drifted to her trip. I reflected at lunch. In the break room, I ate a sandwich, the bread dry, and thought, was it just an interview? The CEO's face from the site, sharp suit, smug smile, nagged at me. A co-worker joined, good food? And I forced a laugh, yeah, fine, but said, heard anything about Nexus? He shrugged, not much, why? I dodged, just curious, the doubt a shadow. I sipped water, muttering, something's wrong, the stability I'd built trembling. I probed further. That afternoon, I called a friend outside work, the line crackling, and said, no Nexus Designs? He paused. Yeah, shady stuff. CEO's a creep. I asked, like what? And he lowered his voice. Heard he pressures women, calls it team building. I gripped the phone, serious? And he said, afraid so. Check deeper. I thanked him, appreciated, and hung up thinking, she went there? A colleague texted busy day, and I replied, yeah, digging, the unease sharp. Home brought no clarity. She was sketching, the pencil soft, and I said, good day. She nodded, quiet, but her eyes avoided mine. I sat, heard about Nexus, anything odd? She tensed, just a job, and I pressed, Tom says the CEO's trouble. She shrugged, rumors maybe, and I muttered, maybe not. The doubt growing. A neighbor knocked, mail for you, and I took it, thanks. My mind elsewhere. The night deep in my fears. We ate dinner, the chicken dry, and I said, tell me about the interview. She said, met the team, signed papers. But her voice was flat. I asked CEO there, and she nodded, briefly, nice guy. I frowned. Tom says otherwise. And she snapped, not everyone's right. I backed off. Okay, but thought, she's hiding it. The worry await. A friend called. How's she? And I said, home, but off. The suspicion firm. I dug online. Late that night, I sat with my laptop, the screen bright, and searched Nexus CEO scandal, finding forums, vague posts about unethical hires. This can't be. I muttered, scrolling. A co-worker's email pinged work update, and I replied, got it, but focus on the screen. I thought, she agreed to this, and said, need proof. The doubt of fire. The apartment was silent, and I added, what did she do? The stability cracking. The next day, I watched her. At breakfast, the eggs sizzling. I said, still tired? She nodded, yeah. And I asked, from the trip or? She cut in, just work now, avoiding more. I served her plate, thinking, not buying it, the worry a constant. A neighbor waved, nice morning, and I smiled, yeah. But my mind raced. At work, a colleague said, focused, and I said, trying, the name Nexus echoing, the doubts a storm. The day she was due back, I paced the apartment, the floor creaking underfoot, waiting for the familiar sound of her key. When it came, the door opened slowly, and there she stood, suitcase in hand, her face drawn and quiet. You're home, I said, stepping forward, the relief tinged with worry. She nodded, yeah, and set the bag down, her smile barely there. I hugged her, but she felt stiff, and I muttered, not the welcome I expected. A neighbor knocked, she's back, and I called, yep, just now. My focus on her. Her mood was off. We moved to the kitchen, the table cold, and I asked, how was the trip? She shrugged, long, tiring, her voice flat. I poured water, the glasses clinking, and said, missed you. Tell me everything. She sat, it was fine, just glad to be back, but her eyes avoided mine. I frowned, not the excitement I thought, and she forced a smile, jet lag, I guess. A friend texted she home, and I replied, yeah, but quiet, the unease growing. I tried to connect. That evening, I cooked dinner, the chicken sizzling, and said, "Celebrating your job, pasta night." She joined me. You didn't have to, and I laughed. For you, I do. We ate, the fork scraping, and I asked, "How'd the last day go?" She said, "Wrapped up the offer, that's it." Her tone dull. I nodded. "Remote's perfect." But she just poked at her food. A coworker called, "Good reunion?" And I said, "Trying." The distance palpable. She brushed it off. Later, we sat on the couch, the TV off, and I said, "You seem off. Everything okay?" She leaned back. "I'm fine. Just tired from travel." I pressed, "More than that, right?" And she sighed, "No, really, let it go." I watched her, thinking, not convinced, and muttered, "Something's up." A neighbor waved from the window, "All good?" And I nodded, "Yeah." The effort strained. The room felt heavy. Her reserve a wall. I started digging. The next morning, I made coffee, the pot gurgling, and said, "Sleep okay?" She nodded, "Better," but stayed quiet. Alone at work, I pulled Tom aside, the office humming, and said, "About Nexus. Any more on that CEO?" He tensed. "Heard," he slicked. Dig into their site. I nodded, "Thanks," and opened my laptop, the screen bright. I searched Nexus hiring practices, finding cryptic posts, and muttered, "This isn't good," the suspicion growing. The search continued. At lunch, I scrolled forums, the break room quiet, and read about unusual interviews. What's this mean? I said to myself, the worry and not. A coworker joined Deep Thoughts, and I said, "Just work," hiding it. Back at my desk, I called a contact, the line crackling, and asked, "No Nexus CO?" He said, "Shady guy, power trips," and I thanked him, appreciated, the doubt solidifying. I thought, she's tied to this, the stability cracking. Home brought no answers. She sketched, the pencil soft, and I asked, "Feeling better?" She said, "A bit," but her focus was elsewhere. I sat, "Anything from the trip bug you?" And she replied, "No, just work now," her voice tight. I nodded, okay, but muttered, not buying it. The information gathering a mission. A neighbor knocked, quiet day, and I said, "Yeah," my mind racing. The sketchbook stayed open, a silent clue. I pieced it together. That night, I sat with my phone, the light dim, and searched Nexus CO behavior, finding allegations, vague but troubling. "This can't be," I said, scrolling. A friend called. "How's she?" And I replied, "Home, but off, digging into her job." He said, "Careful," and I nodded, "Yeah." The worry of fire. I thought, she's hiding something big. The return of mask. The apartment was still, and I added, "Need to know." The quest starting. The next day, I watched her. At breakfast, the egg sizzling. I said, "Remote setup soon?" She nodded, "Yeah, next week." But her smile was forced. I served her plate, thinking, what happened there? A coworker texted, "Busy?" And I replied, "Yeah, researching." The focus shifting. At work, I met Tom again, saying, "Found stuff, CO's dirty." And he said, "Told you, keep digging." I nodded, "Will do." The information a lifeline, the return a puzzle to solve. The days after her return stretched with a tension I couldn't shake. I sat at my desk, the office quiet, scrolling through notes from my late-night searches. The screen glowing. A call from an old college buddy, Mark, came through, his voice crackling. "Heard you're digging into Nexus?" I said, "Yeah, something's off." And he lowered his tone. "Got a tip? Unofficial loyalty test for women there." I froze. "What kind?" And he said, "Pressure from the CO, disguised as interviews." The words hit, and I muttered, "No way." The suspicion of fire. I pressed for details. At lunch, I met Mark at a cafe, the chair scraping, and asked, "How do you know?" He leaned in. "A friend worked there, quit after seeing it." I sipped coffee, the mug warm, and said, "What?" He explained, "They test loyalty, personal favors, off the books." I clenched my fist. "Proof?" And he nodded. "Check her emails, subtle hints." I thanked him, appreciated, and left thinking, she's involved? A coworker passed, "Busy day?" And I said, "Yeah." The weight growing. I found evidence. Back home, she was sketching, the pencil soft, and I said, "Need to check something." She nodded. "Go ahead." And I sat with her laptop, the keys clicking. I opened her email, finding a thread, Nexus HR, a vague agreement note. "What's this?" I muttered, reading lines about team commitment. She glanced over work stuff, but I said, "Looks more." The sketchbook lay open, and I thought, she signed up for this. The proof of sting. A neighbor knocked. "Mail!" And I took it. "Thanks." My mind racing. The realization hit. That evening, I cooked, the pan hissing, and thought, she agreed to a test. The email replayed, her reply, "Okay for the job." And I muttered, "Unbelievable." She joined me, "Smells good." And I said, "We need to talk." My voice firm. She tense. "About what?" And I showed her the screen, this Nexus loyalty thing. Her face paled, and I added, "Tell me it's not true." A friend texted, "How's it going?" And I ignored it, the focus sharp. I confronted her. We sat at the table, the food cold, and I said, "Mark says they pressure women, did you?" She looked down. "It's not what you think." And I snapped, "Then what?" "You agreed." She sighed. "It was one meeting for the job." And I stared, "A meeting?" The kitchen was still, and I muttered, "This changes everything." The betrayal sinking. A coworker called late night, and I said, "Busy." The tension thick. She tried to explain. "It was a condition," she said, her voice low, and I asked, "What kind?" She hesitated. "Just talk, prove I fit." And I said, "Fit how?" She avoided my eyes. They wanted trust, and I growled, "Trust or something else?" The table creaked as I leaned, thinking. She sold out. A neighbor waved from the window. "All good?" And I nodded, "Yeah." The lie easy. The proof mounted. I pulled up the forum post, the screen bright, and said, "Look, others say the same." She read, "It's exaggerated." But I pointed, "Your email says yes." She flinched. I needed this. And I replied, "We didn't need it. I provide." The room felt small, and I muttered, "You chose this." The evidence wall. A friend stopped by, heard voices, and I said, "Just talking." The confrontation raw. The talk turned serious. That night, I sat her down, the couch sinking, and said, "We can't ignore this." She crossed her arms. "I did it for us," and I laughed bitterly. "Us?" "You went behind me." She said, "It's my career." And I stood, "Not like this." The lamp flickered, and I thought, she broke trust, the anger rising. A co-worker texted, "All okay?" And I replied, "Working on it." The doubt a chasm. I demanded answers. The next morning, I made tea, the kettle whistling, and said, "Full story, now." She sat, "It was a dinner, that's all." And I asked, "With who?" She said, "The CO, casual." And I snapped, "Casual?" After what I heard. She cried, "I had to." And I paced, muttering, "This isn't you." The exposure wound. A neighbor asked, "Quiet day?" And I said, "Yeah." The truth buried. The conversation a breaking point. The air in the apartment thickened after our talk, the weight of her confession settling like dust. We stood in the living room, the couch untouched, and I said, "Explain this, really." She crossed her arms, her voice shaky. "I thought you'd understand. I needed this." I stared. "Understand what?" "You agreed to that." She nodded. "It means nothing, just a formality." And I snapped, "Formality? You met him alone." The lamp flickered, and I muttered, "Unbelievable," the shock hitting. A neighbor knocked. "All good?" And I called, "Yeah." The lie brittle. She kept justifying. We moved to the kitchen, the table cold, and she said, "It was just once for my career." I leaned on the counter. "Once? For a job we don't need." She sighed, "I wanted to contribute." And I laughed bitterly. "I've been doing that." The sink dripped, a steady tap, and I thought, she threw us away. A friend texted, heard shouting, and I replied, sorting it, the tension raw. She added, "You have done the same." And I growled, "Not like that." My shock deepened. That evening, I paced, the floor creaking, and said, "You betrayed me for what?" She sat, "It wasn't betrayal, just a step." And I stopped, "A step over me?" The room felt small, and I muttered, "I provided everything." The hurt a knife. She cried, "I thought you'd support me." And I said, "Not this way." The window showed the street quiet, and I thought, she chose a creep over us. A coworker called late night, and I said, "Yeah, tough one." The shock a storm. I challenged her. We faced off by the couch, the cushion sagging, and I asked, "What did he want?" She looked down. "Just talk, prove I'm loyal." And I snapped, "Loyal to him?" She said, "To the job." And I threw up my hands. "We didn't need it." The TV hummed off, and I muttered, "You sold out." The betrayal clear. A neighbor waved from the window. Quiet now. And I nodded. Yeah, the anger simmering. She added, it's not a big deal. And I said, to you? Her excuses wore thin. The next morning, I made coffee, the pot gurgling, and said, let's be real. She joined me. I did it for us. And I laughed. Us? You met him behind my back. She sipped. I thought you'd see my side. And I replied, your side's a lie? The kitchen was still, and I thought, she's lost it. The shock await. A friend stopped by. Oh, okay. And I said, working on it. The confrontation ongoing. I drew the line. That afternoon, I sat her down the table hard and said, this ends here. She said, I just wanted to work. Her voice breaking, and I stared. At what cost? She cried. It was one night, and I stood. One night too many. The room spun, and I muttered, I can't unsee this. The hurt raw. A co-worker texted, update, and I replied, big talk. The decision forming. I declared her freedom. That night, we stood by the door, the air thick, and I said, you're independent now. She blinked. What? And I continued, live how you want, but not with me. She reached out, please, and I stepped back. No, your choice, your life. The suitcase from her trip sat there, a symbol, and I thought, done. A neighbor asked, moving, and I said, maybe. The brake clear. She sobbed. I didn't mean to, and I said, too late. The shock turning to resolve. The fallout began. I packed a bag, the zipper loud, and said, I need space. She watched, don't go, and I replied, you made this bed. The apartment felt foreign, and I muttered, betrayed for a job, the anger is shield. A friend called, what's happening? And I said, ending it. The line drawn. I thought, she's on her own, the independence a final word. The door clicked shut, and I added, my piece now, the chapter closing. The next day, I stayed at a friend's, the couch hard, and reflected. She texted, let's talk, and I deleted it, muttering, no more. A co-worker asked, where you at? And I said, taking a break, the shock fading. I thought of her excuses, the CEO, and said, she chose wrong, the resolve firm. The street outside was quiet, and I added, I'm done, the betrayal a lesson learned. The night I walked out, the apartment door clicked shut behind me, the sound echoing in my chest. I told her to leave, or maybe it was me packing a bag, the zipper loud. But either way, the space was mine again, empty and still. I crashed at a friend's place, the couch hard under me, and muttered, this is it. He peeked, and you okay? And I nodded. Getting there, the silence a new weight. The street outside hummed, and I thought, no going back. The break final. I settled into quiet. The next day, I found a small rental, the keys cold in my hand, and moved my basics, clothes, a lamp, the guitar. Fresh start, I said, unpacking, the boxes rustling. A neighbor knocked, new guy, and I smiled. Yeah, just me. The walls were bare, and I sat, the chair creaking, thinking. She's gone. A co-worker texted, where you at? And I replied, new spot, the emptiness a canvas. I cooked alone, the pan hissing, and muttered, just me now, the silence loud. She reached out. My phone buzzed that evening, her name flashing, and I saw a text, can we talk? I stared, the screen glowing, and deleted it, saying, no. She called next, the ring sharp, and I let it go to voicemail, her voice faint, please, I'm sorry. I turned off, muttering, not today, the hurt is shield. A friend stopped by, heard from her, and I said, ignoring it, the distance firm. The room stayed quiet, and I thought, she's persistent. The messages kept coming. The next morning I made coffee, the pot gurgling, and checked. Another text. I didn't mean it. I deleted it, saying, done with that, and scrolled past voicemails, her pleas muffled. At work, Tom asked, still off the grid? And I nodded, yeah, cutting ties. The office hummed, and I muttered, she won't let go. The silence a refuge. A colleague passed, busy day, and I said, sorting life, the emptiness growing. I reflected hard. That afternoon, I sat with a guitar, the strings soft, and thought, what went wrong? Her excuses, career, contribution, replayed, and I said, not worth it. The new place felt sterile, and I paced, the floor cold, muttering, she chose him over us. A friend called, holding up? And I replied, yeah, rethinking everything, the silence a teacher. The window showed a gray sky, and I added, learn my lesson, the hurt fading. Her calls persisted. That night, my phone lit up again, her name insistent, and I silenced it, saying, "No more." A voicemail pinged. "I miss you." And I deleted it, thinking, too late. I cooked the kitchen sparse and muttered, "She's desperate now." A neighbor waved, "Quiet night," and I nodded, "Yeah, the piece hard one." A co-worker texted, "Any news?" And I said, "None I want," the distance a wall. I cleared her out. The next day, I opened my phone gallery, her photos smiling back, and stared. "Time to go," I said, deleting it, the screen refreshing. Her sketches, once on the walls, were gone, and I thought, no traces. At work, Mark asked, "Moved on?" And I said, "Working on it." The emptiness of space to fill. I sat, the chair creaking, and muttered, "She's history," the silence a comfort. The void grew. That evening, I played the guitar, the notes low, and reflected, she broke trust. The rental felt mine, and I said, "Building anew." A friend stopped by. "Place looks good." And I grinned, "Thanks, my space now." Her text kept coming, but I blocked her, muttering, "Enough." The street was quiet, and I thought, no more her. The emptiness a strength. A co-worker called, "Better?" And I said, "Getting there." The silence a friend. I analyzed it all. The next morning I cooked eggs, the pan sizzling, and thought, she wanted independence. Got it. The betrayal stung, but I said, "My choice now." The reflection clear. A neighbor asked, "Settling in?" And I nodded, "Yeah," slowly, the void a lesson. At work, Tom said, "Strong move." And I replied, "Had to." The silence a shield. I deleted her last message, muttering, "Close book." The emptiness a new beginning. Weeks turned into months, and the rental became a place of quiet recovery. I woke to the sound of the coffee maker, the aroma filling the small space, and thought, getting back to me. The guitar leaned against the wall, and I strummed, the notes uneven but familiar. A neighbor knocked. "Morning music?" And I smiled, "Yeah, practice." The routine returned, work, walks, music, and I muttered, "This is my rhythm." The healing slow. A co-worker texted, "Back in the groove?" And I replied, "Yeah, finally." The piece growing. I found my footing. At work, I led a meeting, the room attentive, and a colleague said, "Solid pitch, boosting me." I nodded, "Thanks," and thought, "I've got this again." Home, I cooked, the pan sizzling, and said, "Dinner for one, the kitchen a sanctuary." A friend stopped by, looking better, and I grinned, feeling it. The betrayal faded, a scar, and I muttered, "Moving on, the rhythm a lifeline." The window showed a clear sky, and I added, "My pace now." A new face appeared. One evening, I met someone at a cafe. Her laugh light over coffee. "New here?" she asked, and I said, "Sort of, moved recently." We talked art, music, and she smiled. "You play?" I nodded, trying to, the caution there. A friend texted date, and I replied, "Just chat." The step small. I thought, not rushing, and muttered, "Learn that lesson." The new path tentative. The street buzz, and I added, "Maybe later." I stayed guarded. The next day, I walked with her, the park green, and she said, "Nice spot." I agreed, "Yeah, my escape," but kept it light, no deep shares. She asked, "Long story?" And I shrugged, "Some pass. At home, I played guitar, the strings soft, and thought, not ready to trust. A co-worker called, "How's a new friend?" And I said, "Slow going, the caution firm." The rental felt safe, and I muttered, "My terms, the healing deliberate." Time softened the edges. Weeks later, I cooked with her, the kitchen warm, and she laughed. "You're good at this." I said, "Practice," and thought, easy company. A neighbor waved, "Busy night?" And I nodded, "Yeah, cooking." The rhythm steady. The past, her choice, the CO, faded, and I muttered, "Not my burden." A friend stopped by, "Progress?" And I replied, "Bit by bit." The new path clear. The music played, a backdrop. The final moment came. One night, I sat with an old photo, us, smiling, and stared. Different time, I said, "The image worn." I set it down, stood, and faced a mirror, my reflection steady. A co-worker texted, "All good?" And I replied, "Yeah, reflecting, the choice firm." I thought, no revenge, just me, and muttered, "Self-respect wins." The rental glowed, and I added, "Close that door, the path my own." I let go fully. The next morning, I made coffee, the pot gurgling, and threw the photo out, the bin clanking. "Done," I said, the weight lifting. At work, Mark asked, moved on? And I nodded, working on it. Home, I played the guitar clear and thought, new start. A neighbor asked, happy now? And I smiled, getting there, the silence a friend. I looked in the mirror again, muttering, my choice, the respect a shield. The day flowed. I walked, the air fresh, and met her again, saying, coffee sometime? She nodded, sure, and I thought, slow, safe. A friend called, good step? And I said, yeah, my way, the caution easing. The park was lively, kids playing, and I muttered, life's mine, the path solid. At home, I cooked, the pan warm, and said, this is it, the rhythm of victory. The night closed with peace. I sat by the window, the street quiet, and played softly, thinking, no hate left. The mirror caught me, and I said, I chose me, the reflection strong. A co-worker texted, night off? And I replied, yeah, chilling, the closure complete. The photo's absence felt right, and I added, respect over revenge, the new path of promise. The next day, someone asked better, and I grinned, much, the journey mine.